The wind, a relentless, scouring force, carried the first stinging pellets of icy rain, and Patrick squinted against it, pulling the threadbare collar of his jacket tighter around his neck. The sky, a bruised purple and grey, promised a deluge, the kind of early autumn storm that could flatten what little hope remained for a decent harvest. His own small rented patch of land, already struggling, would be unlikely to survive it. He'd been driving the back roads, a desperate circuit in search of day labor. Anything to put food on the table for himself and Lily, when he saw the figure. A woman, wrestling with a heavy tarpaulin near a sprawling, untended orchard, the trees laden with apples that seemed almost incandescent against the darkening sky. The farm itself had a forgotten air, the paint on the sprawling, two-story farmhouse peeling, the fences leaning, yet there was an undeniable grandeur to its bones, a silent testament to a more prosperous past. He slowed his rattling pickup truck, the engine sputtering in protest. It was none of his business. He had his own worries, a mountain of them. But the woman looked small against the vastness of the task, and the wind was a cruel adversary, whipping her hair across her face, yanking at the canvas as if it were a live thing. He thought of Lily, her bright, hopeful face, and the way she always shared her last cookie. A small act of kindness, his mother used to say, was a light in the darkness. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his lean year, he pulled over. "Looks like you could use a hand," he called out, his voice rough from disuse and the chill. The woman startled, whirling around. Her eyes, wide and shadowed, with a fear that seemed too deep for just a looming storm, met his. She was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps late 20s, her face smudged with dirt, her clothes practical but worn. There was a delicacy to her features, a fineness that seemed out of place amidst the rustic decay. She clutched a length of rope, her knuckles white. I'm all right," she said, her voice surprisingly soft, almost musical, yet strained, like a guitar string pulled too tight. But the tarp bucked violently in her grasp, threatening to take flight. Patrick didn't press. He simply walked over, his worn boots crunching on the gravel drive, and took hold of one end of the rebellious canvas. "Storm's coming in fast. Best get these covered if you want to save any." He nodded towards the laden apple trees. "Looks like a good crop. Shame to lose it." She didn't argue, just watched him for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in her gaze. Confusion, perhaps, or just sheer exhaustion. Then she seemed to deflate a little, the tension easing from her shoulders. Together, in a surprisingly efficient silence broken only by the howl of the wind and their own grunts of exertion, they wrestled the heavy tarpaulin over a series of large wooden crates already overflowing with apples. Patrick, with his height and strength, managed the more awkward sections, his movements economical and practiced. He secured the corners with rocks and lengths of rope he found nearby, his hands working with a familiarity born of countless similar tasks. When they were finally done, the crates forming a series of low humps under the secured canvas, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. The woman pushed a stray strand of damp hair from her forehead, leaving another smudge of dirt. She looked at him, her expression, a mixture of gratitude and a lingering, deep-seated bewilderment. "Thank you," she whispered, the words almost lost in the rising crescendo of the storm. I wouldn't have managed that on my own." "No trouble," Patrick said, though his back ached and the damp was already seeping into his bones. "Got to look out for each other, especially with weather like this." He gestured vaguely towards the house. "You got somewhere warm to ride this out?" She looked towards the imposing, shadowed structure as if seeing it for the first time, or perhaps as if it were a place she wasn't entirely sure she belonged. "Yes," she said, a note of uncertainty in her voice. "Yes, I think so." Then, a sudden, sharp intake of breath, her hand flying to her temple as if warding off a blow. She swayed, and Patrick instinctively reached out, steadying her arm. "Hey, are you all right?" he asked, concern lacing his tone. Her skin was cold beneath his touch. She blinked, her eyes unfocused for a moment. Then she seemed to gather herself. "Just a bit dizzy. The wind, I suppose." She pulled her arm away gently. "Thank you again. For everything." She fumbled in the pocket of her jeans, her brow furrowed in concentration. I don't seem to have my purse. I wanted to pay you for your time." Patrick shook his head. "Don't worry about it. Just glad I could help." He glanced up at the sky. "I should get going. Got my little girl waiting." A flicker of something soft, almost wistful, crossed her face. "A little girl?" "Lily. She's 7. A rare smile touched his lips. "She's a good kid." The woman nodded slowly. "That's nice." She looked around, at the neglected orchard, the sprawling, silent house, then back at him. Her eyes filled with a profound, aching confusion that tugged at something deep inside him. I don't remember," she began, then trailed off, her gaze distant. "Don't remember what?" Patrick prompted gently. She shook her head, a small, helpless gesture. It's all a bit of a blur. The storm, I think. It came on so suddenly." She pressed her fingers to her temples again. "My head. It aches." He saw it then, not just exhaustion or the stress of the storm, but a genuine, terrifying disorientation. It was in the way her eyes didn't quite focus, the way she seemed adrift, unmoored. He'd seen that look once before, in a man who'd suffered a head injury in a logging accident. "When did you get here?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. "To this farm?" She looked around again, as if searching for an answer in the wind-lashed trees. I'm not sure. Today, yesterday, it's foggy." Her voice was small, fragile. "My name, I think it's Lila." She said the name uncertainly, as if tasting it for the first time. "Just Lila." Patrick's concern deepened. This was more than just being caught unprepared by a storm. The rain was coming down in earnest now, plastering his thin jacket to his skin. He couldn't just leave her like this, not with that lost, hunted look in her eyes. "Lila," he said, testing the name. "Look, it's getting bad out here. You shouldn't be alone if you're not feeling well. My place isn't far. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. Lily and I can make sure you're all right until this storm passes and you can figure things out." She hesitated, her gaze darting from his face to the looming house, then back again. Trust didn't come easily. He could see the fear warring with an undeniable vulnerability. He imagined, for a moment, what it must be like to be so utterly adrift, the anchor of one's own identity gone. I don't want to be a bother," she said, her voice barely audible above the drumming rain. "It's no bother at all," Patrick insisted, trying to inject a warmth and reassurance he didn't always feel himself into his voice. "Come on, before we both drown out here." He gestured towards his truck. "It's not fancy, but it'll get us there." After a long moment, a moment in which the wind seemed to hold its breath, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He led her to the passenger side, holding the creaking door open for her. She slid onto the worn seat, shivering, and pulled her arms around herself. As he walked around to the driver's side, he glanced back at the grand, neglected farmhouse, a silent sentinel in the storm, and a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold traced its way down his spine. There was a story here, a deep and troubling one, and he had a sinking feeling he and Lily had just stepped right into the middle of it. The woman, Lila, stared out at the rain-streaked landscape, her brow furrowed, a single disconnected image, perhaps of a brightly lit stage or a face she couldn't quite place. flickering at the edges of her consciousness before dissolving back into the overwhelming fog. Her only certainty was the dull throb in her head and the unfamiliar kindness of the stranger beside her. The drive to Patrick's small, rented cottage was short, the truck's wipers battling valiantly against the sheets of rain. Lily was at the window, her small face pressed against the glass, and her eyes widened when she saw the unfamiliar woman emerge from the passenger side, looking pale and drenched. Patrick quickly ushered Lila inside, into the relative warmth of the small living room, where a patched sofa and a well-loved armchair were clustered around a small wood-burning stove. "Lily, Bug, this is Lila," Patrick said, helping Lila out of her damp jacket. "She got caught in the storm. We're going to help her get warm and dry." Lily, usually a chatterbox, regarded Lila with a solemn curiosity. She was a miniature version of Patrick, with the same earnest brown eyes and a scattering of freckles across her nose. "Are you cold?" Lily asked, her voice soft. Lila managed a faint smile. "Yes, very cold." "Papa makes the best hot chocolate," Lily announced, as if this were a universally acknowledged fact. "It makes everything better." Patrick chuckled. "Go on then, Chief. You supervise the hot chocolate making. I'll get some dry clothes for Lila." He rummaged in a chest, producing a worn but clean sweatshirt and a pair of soft sweatpants, things his late wife, Sarah, had left behind. They'd be too big for Lila, but they'd be dry. While Lila changed in the tiny bathroom, Patrick stoked the fire in the stove, the crackle and pop of the kindling, a comforting sound against the storm's fury outside. Lily, perched on a stool in the small kitchen alcove, meticulously measured cocoa powder into mugs. "Is she lost, Papa?" Lily asked, her voice hushed. "I think so, sweetie," Patrick replied, keeping his voice low. "A little bit lost, but we'll help her find her way, won't we? Like when Mr. Grumble's cat went missing and we put up posters." Patrick smiled. "Something like that." When Lila emerged, swamped in Sarah's old clothes, her still damp hair clinging to her pale face, she looked even more fragile. But the warmth of the stove seemed to be seeping into her, and she accepted the steaming mug of hot chocolate from Lily with a grateful murmur. She sat on the edge of the sofa, cradling the mug in her hands, her gaze distant as she stared into the flames. "This is very kind of you," she said after a long silence, her voice a little stronger now. "Both of you. Everyone needs a little help sometimes," Patrick said simply, taking the armchair opposite her. Lily snuggled onto his lap, her earlier shyness overcome by her natural empathy. "Do you remember anything else?" Patrick asked gently. "Anything at all, a last name, where you were coming from?" Lila shook her head slowly, her eyes clouded with the effort of trying to pierce the fog. "No, it's like a wall. A thick, gray wall. I try to see past it, but there's nothing. Just feelings sometimes. A flash of color, a sound, like music, but I can't quite hear the tune." She frowned, a deep line appearing between her brows. "And a name, a word maybe. Willow Creek? Does that mean anything?" Patrick exchanged a glance with Lily. Willow Creek was the name of the area, the small, unincorporated township where her farm, or the farm she'd been found on, was located. It was also the name of the actual creek that ran through the valley. "That's the name of this area," he confirmed. "The farm you were at, it's on Willow Creek Road." A flicker of something? Recognition? Or just more confusion? Crossed her face. "My farm?" she whispered. "Is it mine?" "I don't know, Lila," Patrick said honestly. "You were there, trying to cover the apples. It looked like it hadn't been worked in a while, but the trees were full." He hesitated, unsure how much to press. "Do you remember buying a farm?" She closed her eyes, her face tight with concentration. The silence stretched, broken only by the drumming rain and the crackling fire. I see a gate," she said finally. her voice strained. A white gate with a weeping willow beside it, and a feeling of sadness, but also hope, like it was supposed to be a new beginning. Her eyes opened, filled with frustration. "But it's just a picture. I don't know what it means." "That farm," Patrick said slowly, "it has a white gate, and there's a big old willow right by the entrance to the drive." Lila stared at him, her lips parting slightly. The connection, however tenuous, seemed to shake her. "It does?" Over the next few days, the storm raged and then slowly subsided, leaving behind a world washed clean and glistening. Lila remained with Patrick and Lily. Her physical strength returned, but the fog in her mind showed little sign of lifting. She remembered the name Lila, the phrase Willow Creek, and had fleeting, disconnected sensory impressions: the scent of old wood and lemon polish, the feel of cool ivory keys beneath her fingertips, a melody that haunted the edges of her hearing, always just out of reach. She was quiet, gentle, and unfailingly polite, helping Lily with her simple chores, her hands, though soft, showing a surprising deftness when mending a tear in Lily's favorite overalls or kneading dough for bread alongside Patrick. Patrick made discreet inquiries. He called the county sheriff's office, describing Lila, asking about any missing persons reports. There were none that matched. He drove back to the Willow Creek farm, his old truck navigating the muddy ruts of the lane. The house stood silent, imposing, almost watchful. He tried the doors. They were locked. Peering through a grimy window, he saw rooms filled with dust-sheeted furniture, the air inside still and heavy with disuse. There was no sign of a recent inhabitant, no purse, no identification, nothing to indicate who Lila was or why she had been there. It was as if she had materialized out of the storm itself. One afternoon, as Lila was helping Patrick sort through a box of old tools in the shed, her hand brushed against something smooth and metallic. She picked it up. An old, tarnished pitch pipe, the kind musicians used. As her fingers closed around it, a jolt, sharp and sudden, went through her. She saw a flash of bright lights, felt the familiar weight of a guitar strap on her shoulder, heard the roar of a crowd. The sensations were so vivid, so overwhelming, that she gasped, dropping the pitch pipe with a clatter. "Lila? What is it?" Patrick asked, turning at the sound. She was pale, trembling, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning recognition. "Music," she whispered, her voice hoarse. I think I know music." She looked at her hands, then slowly, hesitantly, reached for the pitch pipe again. Her fingers, clumsy at first, then with a growing, instinctual certainty, found the selector, and she blew a clear, perfect A. The sound hung in the dusty air of the shed, pure and true. And with it, another name surfaced, breaking through the fog like a hesitant sunbeam. "True. My name. It might be Lila. True." Patrick stared at her, the name echoing in his mind. Lila True. It sounded familiar, but he couldn't immediately place it. He was more of a classic rock and old blues man himself. Contemporary country music wasn't really on his radar. "Lila True," he repeated slowly. "Are you sure?" I think so," she said, a new light dawning in her eyes. "It feels right." She looked down at the pitch pipe in her hand, then up at Patrick, a fragile hope blooming on her face. Could you look it up? That name, Lila True." That evening, after Lily was asleep, Patrick sat at his aging laptop, the dial-up connection agonizingly slow. He typed Lila True into the search engine. The results began to load, line by line. And then he saw it. Article after article. Photographs. Headlines. "Country superstar Lila True vanishes." Lila True. Where did she go? The mystery of Lila True. 5 years on. He stared at the screen, his heart pounding. The woman in the photographs, performing on brightly lit stages, accepting awards, smiling dazzlingly for cameras, was undeniably, unmistakably, the woman asleep on his patched sofa. Her hair was longer, styled, her clothes glamorous, but the eyes, the delicate features, the almost ethereal quality, it was her. Lila, the quiet, lost woman he'd found in the storm. Was Lila True, one of the biggest names in country music, a Grammy-winning artist who had, according to the articles, walked away from it all 5 years ago without a word, disappearing into thin air, leaving behind a multi-million-dollar career and an army of bewildered fans and industry speculation. The Willow Creek Farm. He remembered reading something, a small detail in one of the older articles, about her buying a secluded property in a rural area under an assumed name shortly before she disappeared, seeking privacy and escape. It had to be the same farm. She had been on her way there, perhaps, or had been living there in secret, and something had happened, an accident, an illness, that had triggered this profound amnesia. He looked over at Lila, curled up under a faded quilt, her face peaceful in sleep, for the first time truly peaceful since he'd met her. The sheer scale of her forgotten life was staggering. The wealth, the fame, the pressure. It was a world away from the simple, hard-scrabble existence he and Lily knew. And the questions were overwhelming. Why had she left it all? What had happened to cause her to lose her memory so completely? And what, in God's name, was he supposed to do now? He gently closed the laptop. One thing was certain. The fragile peace she had found in their quiet cottage was about to be shattered. The world would come rushing back in with all its noise and demands, the moment her identity was widely known. He felt a fierce, protective surge. She needed time. She needed space to heal, to remember at her own pace, if that was even possible. The next morning, he didn't immediately tell her what he'd found. Instead, he watched her. She hummed as she helped Lily make pancakes, a clear, sweet melody that wove itself effortlessly through the morning air. She laughed when Lily, covered in flour, did a little dance. There was a lightness about her, a nascent joy that had been absent before. The name Lila True had been a key, unlocking some small, vital part of her, even if the full memory of who that person was remained hidden. Later that day, while Lily was engrossed in a drawing project at the kitchen table, Patrick found Lila staring out the window, a wistful expression on her face. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. She turned, a small, troubled frown creasing her forehead. "That farm," she said. "Willow Creek. I keep seeing it, the white gate, the willow tree." She hesitated. "There's something else. A locket. Small, silver, heart-shaped. I think it was my mother's." Her eyes filled with a sudden, unexpected rush of tears. "I can almost feel it in my hand, but I don't know where it is. I don't know if it's real." Patrick's mind raced. A locket. It was the kind of personal item that might hold a clue, a tangible link. "Your mother?" he prompted gently. "Do you remember her?" Lila shook her head, dashing the tears away with the back of her hand. "Not clearly, just warmth and a song, a lullaby." Her voice was thick with unshed emotion. "Oh, Patrick, it's like being haunted by ghosts you can't quite see." He made a decision. "Lila," he said, his voice firm but kind. "I found out some things last night. About the name Lila True." She tensed, her eyes searching his face. "What did you find?" He told her. Then, as gently as he could, he told her about the fame, the music, the awards, the sudden disappearance. He showed her the articles on his laptop, the photographs. She stared at the screen, her face pale, her expression unreadable. She touched the image of herself on a concert stage, her fingers tracing the outline of the smiling, confident woman who seemed like a stranger. "That's me?" she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "All of that? It was my life?" "It seems so," Patrick said softly. "The articles say you bought a farm, a secluded place, right before you went away. I think that farm on Willow Creek Road, the one where I found you, I think it's yours, Lila." She was silent for a long time, absorbing the enormity of it. The quiet, lost woman he had rescued from the storm was a person of immense talent and public recognition, a life lived in the spotlight, now utterly erased from her own mind. The contrast was staggering. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice barely a breath. "Why would I leave all that?" "I don't know," Patrick admitted. "The articles are full of speculation, burnout, a desire for privacy, even whispers of a secret illness or a broken heart. No one seems to know for sure." Lila stood up, pacing the small room like a caged animal. "A singer," she murmured, testing the word. "I sang for all those people." She stopped, her hands clenched. "But I can't remember a single song. Not one lyric." The frustration in her voice was palpable. Then her eyes fell on Lily, who was watching them with wide, concerned eyes, her drawing forgotten. Lila's expression softened. She walked over to Lily, kneeling beside her chair. "It's okay, sweet girl," she said, her voice gentle. "It's just a lot to take in." Lily reached out a small hand and patted Lila's arm. "You sing pretty when you hum," she offered. A watery smile touched Lila's lips. "Do I?" That afternoon, Patrick suggested they go back to the farm on Willow Creek Road. "Maybe seeing it again, knowing it's yours, will help," he said. "And we can look for that locket you mentioned. If it's there, it might trigger something more." Lila hesitated, a flicker of fear in her eyes. The house, in her fragmented mental images, was tied to confusion and perhaps that hope, but also that deep sadness. But the need to know, to uncover the truth of who she was a powerful magnet. She nodded. "Okay, let's go." The farm looked different in the clear autumn sunlight, still neglected, still bearing the scars of years of disuse. But the grandeur was more apparent. The old willow by the white gate wept gracefully, its leaves tinged with gold. As they approached the front door, Lila paused, her hand reaching out as if to touch the weathered wood. I think I have a key," she murmured, frowning in concentration. "Somewhere, a hidden place." Her gaze drifted to a loose stone in the porch steps. She knelt, her fingers fumbling, and then, with a small cry, she pulled out a tarnished brass key. It slid into the lock of the front door with a well-oiled click. The air inside was cool and musty, smelling of dust and time. Sunlight streamed through the grimy windows, illuminating floating dust motes. Most of the furniture was indeed covered in white sheets, ghostly shapes in the dim light. But it was a beautiful house, with high ceilings, ornate woodwork, and a wide, curving staircase. "It's familiar," Lila whispered, her voice hushed with awe and a touch of fear. She walked slowly through the downstairs rooms. A grand living room with a massive stone fireplace, a formal dining room, a spacious kitchen that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Her hand trailed over a dust-sheeted piano in the living room. As her fingers brushed the sheet, a distinct memory, sharp and clear, pierced the fog. Her mother, her face young and smiling, sitting at a similar piano, her fingers dancing over the keys, filling a sunlit room with music. The melody was achingly familiar, a sweet, poignant tune that brought tears to Lila's eyes. "My mother," she breathed, her hand flying to her chest. "She played. She taught me." Energized by this breakthrough, they began a more thorough search. Patrick, methodical and practical, checked drawers and cupboards, while Lila seemed drawn by an invisible thread, moving from room to room as if guided by faint echoes of the past. It was in an upstairs bedroom, a room with a large bay window overlooking the overgrown orchard, that she found it. Tucked away in the back of a drawer in a small rosewood jewelry box, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a small silver heart-shaped locket. Her breath caught in her throat. With trembling fingers she picked it up. It was warm from being enclosed, and it fit perfectly into the palm of her hand, just as she'd imagined. The clasp was stiff, but she managed to open it. Inside, on one side, was a tiny, faded photograph of a smiling woman with kind eyes and hair the same honey blonde as Lila's. On the other side, an inscription, "My songbird, love Mama." "It's her," Lila whispered, tears streaming down her face now, unchecked. "This is my mother. And she called me her songbird." She clutched the locket to her chest, a sob escaping her. The grief was fresh, raw, as if the loss had happened only yesterday. Yet intertwined with it was a profound sense of connection, of coming home to a part of herself she hadn't known was missing. Patrick stood silently beside her, giving her space for her emotions. He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. The locket was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a key, unlocking not just a memory, but a torrent of feeling. As she held the locket, other fragments began to surface, coalescing around the image of her mother, memories of singing together, harmonizing on old folk songs. Her mother teaching her first chords on a battered acoustic guitar. The joy, the pure, unadulterated joy of making music, before it had become a business, a pressure, a gilded cage. But with the sweetness came a shadow, a fleeting image of her mother, looking sad, tired. Arguments, hushed but intense, with a man whose face remained indistinct, a figure associated with a sense of unease, of being controlled. This man, he was connected to the music business, to the pressures that had begun to mount even before her mother's early death from a sudden illness. There was someone else, Lila said slowly, her voice still thick with tears. The locket clutched tightly in her hand. "A manager, I think. After Mama died, he pushed me. He wanted more. Always more." Her brow furrowed. "His name? Martin. Martin Thorne." The name left a bitter taste in her mouth. She remembered a smooth, persuasive voice, eyes that never quite crinkled when he smiled, and a constant, suffocating sense of obligation. The visit to the farm had cracked open the door to her past. The identity of Lila True, country music superstar, was now linked to Lila, the daughter, the songbird. But the reasons for her flight, the shadows that had driven her to abandon everything, were still largely obscured, hinted at only by the unease associated with Martin Thorne and the remembered weight of expectation. They explored more of the house. In a small study, tucked away at the back, they found a wall lined with gold and platinum records, music awards, framed photographs of Lila with other famous musicians, with dignitaries, even a former president. Seeing them, Lila felt a strange detachment, as if looking at the achievements of another person. There was a flicker of pride, yes, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of oppression, a memory of relentless schedules, of endless travel, of feeling like a product, packaged and sold. In a desk drawer, beneath a pile of old sheet music, Patrick found a thick legal document. It was a recording contract, densely worded and complex. He scanned it briefly, his layman's eye catching phrases like exclusive rights, in perpetuity, non-negotiable. Even without understanding the legal jargon, he could sense the restrictive nature of it. "This looks like your recording contract," he said, handing it to Lila. She took it, her fingers tracing the embossed logo of a major record label. As she looked at it, a wave of anxiety washed over her. She remembered signing it, a young, grieving 19-year-old, overwhelmed and trusting, with Martin Thorne at her elbow, guiding her hand, telling her it was standard, that it was the pathway to her dreams, the dreams her mother had held for her. Now, older, though still without her full memory, she felt a cold dread. This document, she sensed, was part of the cage. They also found a box of fan mail, thousands of letters, many of them deeply personal, telling her how her music had touched their lives, helped them through difficult times. Reading a few, Lila felt a warmth spread through her, a sense of connection that was different from the hollowness of the awards. This, she thought, this was real. This was why she had sung. But then, tucked amongst the fan mail, was a different kind of letter. It was on expensive stationery, the tone cold and threatening. It spoke of contractual obligations, of damage to her brand, of legal repercussions if she didn't adhere to the grueling tour schedule Martin Thorne had laid out. It was signed by Thorne himself. Reading it, Lila felt a chill. She remembered the exhaustion, the feeling of being on a relentless treadmill, her creativity stifled, her spirit slowly dimming. She remembered wanting to stop, to rest, to write songs that came from her heart, not from a marketing brief. She remembered Thorne's smooth dismissals, his manipulative reassurances that this was what success looked like, that this was what she owed everyone. "He wouldn't let me stop," she whispered, the letter trembling in her hand. "I wanted to take a break, to just breathe. But he said I couldn't. The label, the sponsors, they wouldn't allow it." A memory flashed, a heated argument in a sterile hotel room, thousands of miles from home, her voice raw with desperation. Thorne's face cold, implacable. She'd felt trapped, utterly powerless. The farm, she now realized, was meant to be her sanctuary, her escape route. She'd bought it in secret, using a legacy her mother had left her, dreaming of a quiet place where she could reconnect with herself, with the music that lived inside her, untainted by commerce. She must have finally made her escape, fled here. And then, something had happened. An accident? A fall? Something that had wiped her memory clean, leaving her stranded between two lives. The details of that final flight, and the immediate aftermath that led to her amnesia, were still missing. But the why was becoming clearer. She hadn't just vanished, she had run. Run from a life that, for all its glittering prizes, had become a prison. As evening approached, casting long shadows through the dusty rooms of the farmhouse, Lila felt a profound weariness, but also a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced since waking to the storm. She was Lila true, yes, but she was also just Lila, a woman who had sought freedom and peace. "I need to understand this," she said to Patrick, gesturing to the contract, to Thorne's threatening letter. "I need to know what I was up against. What I'm still up against." Patrick nodded. He'd been thinking the same thing. This was bigger than just lost memories. There were powerful forces involved. People who had benefited from her career, who might not be happy to see her resurface, especially if she intended to reclaim her autonomy, or worse, expose the exploitative nature of her past dealings. There was a lawyer, Lila said suddenly, another name surfacing. "A good man. My mother trusted him. He tried to warn me about Thorne, about the contract. His name was Arthur Jenkins. He was older, kind. I wonder if he's still around." It was a long shot, but it was a lead. Back at Patrick's cottage, after a quiet dinner, Patrick once again turned to his laptop. Finding Arthur Jenkins, attorney at law, proved easier than he'd expected. He had a small independent practice in Nashville, specializing in artist advocacy. There was an email address. With Lila looking over his shoulder, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation, Patrick composed a careful email. He explained, briefly and without sensationalizing, Lila's situation, her amnesia, her reappearance, her fragmented memories of Martin Thorne and the contract, and her recollection of Arthur Jenkins himself. He asked if Mr. Jenkins might be willing to speak with them, to offer any insight or assistance. He hit send, and they both stared at the screen, as if expecting an immediate reply. The reply came the next morning. It was brief, professional, but with an unmistakable undercurrent of concern. Arthur Jenkins remembered Lila True very well. He remembered her mother. He expressed his shock and relief at hearing she was safe, and he agreed to meet. He could drive out to Willow Creek in 2 days. The 2 days passed in a strange state of suspension for Lila. The farm, now confirmed as hers, beckoned, yet it was also a place heavy with unanswered questions and the ghosts of her past. She spent time with Lily, finding a simple, uncomplicated solace in the child's company. Lily, with a child's straightforward acceptance, seemed untroubled by Lila's extraordinary past. To her, Lila was just Lila, the kind lady who hummed pretty songs and knew how to fix her doll's broken arm. Patrick, meanwhile, felt a growing unease. The more he learned about Lila's past, the more he worried about her future. Martin Thorne, the powerful record label, these were not entities to be taken lightly. He found himself watching over Lila with a protectiveness that went beyond mere kindness. He saw her vulnerability, but also an emerging strength, a quiet determination to reclaim not just her memories, but her life. Arthur Jenkins arrived exactly on time. A portly man in his late 60s, with kind, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and a gentle, reassuring demeanor. He greeted Lila with a warmth that was almost paternal, his relief at seeing her alive and well palpable. They sat in the living room of Patrick's cottage, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. Lily, sensing the gravity of the occasion, sat quietly on the floor, drawing, occasionally glancing up at the adults. "Lila, my dear girl," Arthur began, his voice soft, "it is a miracle to see you. We all feared the worst. When you disappeared, Martin Thorne spun a story about you needing a complete break, going off to find yourself. But as the years went by," he shook his head sadly, "I always suspected there was more to it. You were under immense pressure." Lila, clutching the silver locket in her hand, nodded. "I remember some of it now, Mr. Jenkins. The contract. Martin." I felt so trapped. Arthur's expression grew grim. "That contract," he said, his voice laced with old anger. "It was one of the most predatory agreements I've ever seen. Your mother, God rest her soul, had a much fairer deal with a smaller label. When she passed, and Martin Thorne swooped in, representing that corporate behemoth, I tried to advise you, Lila. You were so young, so trusting. He essentially signed away your life, your creative freedom, for a pittance of what your talent was worth, while ensuring the label and his management company reaped enormous profits." He went on to explain the full extent of the exploitation. Thorne had systematically isolated her from anyone who might offer independent advice, controlled her finances, and overworked her to the point of collapse, all while cultivating a public image of Lila True as a willing and grateful superstar. He'd even taken out a massive insurance policy on her career, an incentive for him to keep her performing, no matter the personal cost to her. When you started talking about wanting to leave, to take a real break, to buy that farm and live quietly," Arthur continued, Thorne panicked. "Your departure would have meant a huge financial loss for him and the label. They couldn't afford to let their asset just walk away. He threatened you, didn't he?" Lila nodded, a shiver running through her. "Yes. He said he'd ruin me, that I'd never work again, that they owned me." The words, remembered now, felt like iron bands around her chest. "I believe," Arthur said, his voice dropping, "that when you finally fled to the farm, Thorn may have even tried to find you, to coerce you back. Or, at the very least, to ensure your disappearance was managed in a way that minimized damage to the label. They released a statement saying you were taking an indefinite sabbatical for personal reasons, effectively silencing any further inquiry and allowing them to continue profiting from your back catalog." Lila absorbed this, her mind reeling. The faceless antagonists were taking shape. It wasn't just a system, it was a specific person, Martin Thorn, driven by greed and a ruthless desire for control. He hadn't just allowed her to disappear, he had, in a way, orchestrated it to his advantage. "What about the farm?" Patrick asked. "How did she manage to buy that without him knowing?" "Your mother, Lila," Arthur explained, "was a canny woman. She set up a small, independent trust for you, money from her own earnings, before Thorn came into the picture. It wasn't a vast sum, but enough for you to buy the Willow Creek property quietly, through me, under a holding company name. It was your one secret, your one escape hatch. Thorn never knew about that trust, or if he did, he couldn't touch it." Lila looked at Arthur, gratitude welling up inside her. "You helped me then. You were trying to protect me." "I did what little I could, my dear," Arthur said gently. "Your mother was a friend. I owed it to her memory." He paused. Then his expression became more serious. "Lila, now that you've resurfaced, Thorn and the label, they will not be pleased. Especially if you start asking questions, or worse, try to reclaim control of your music or your narrative. They have a lot to lose." "What can they do?" Lila asked, her voice small but firm. The fear was still there, but it was now mixed with a growing anger, a resolve. "Legally, that old contract is still binding, though its terms are outrageous and frankly unconscionable by today's standards. They could try to sue you for breach if you attempt to perform or record elsewhere. They could launch a smear campaign, try to discredit you, paint you as unstable. Thorn is a master manipulator, and he has powerful connections." Arthur sighed. "It will be a fight, Lila. A difficult one." A silence fell over the small room. Lily, sensing the tension, had stopped drawing and was now nestled close to Patrick, her small hand gripping his. Lila looked at Patrick, at the unwavering support in his eyes. She looked at Lily, a symbol of the simple, honest life she craved. She touched the locket at her throat, a reminder of her mother's love and the true source of her music. The fog in her mind hadn't completely lifted. There were still gaps, uncertainties. But her core, her sense of self, was solidifying. She knew who she was, and she knew what she wanted. Freedom. Freedom from Thorn, freedom from the past, freedom to live and make music on her own terms. "I understand," Lila said, her voice clear and steady now. "But I can't go back to hiding. I won't let him, or that contract, control me any longer. I need to face this, Mr. Jenkins. Will you help me?" Arthur Jenkins looked at her, saw the steel in her eyes, the quiet dignity that reminded him so much of her mother. A slow smile spread across his face. "Yes, Lila," he said. "It would be my honor to help you fight for your song back." The first step, Arthur advised, was to consolidate her position. He helped Lila formally reclaim ownership of the Willow Creek farm, transferring it from the holding company to her name. He also began the painstaking process of reviewing her old contracts, her financial statements, anything that could provide leverage or expose Thorn's misdeeds. It was a daunting task. Thorn had been meticulous in covering his tracks, at least legally. Meanwhile, Lila, with Patrick's steady presence and Lily's cheerful companionship, began to truly inhabit the farm. The house, once a place of shadowy memories and uncertain future, started to feel like home. They aired out the rooms, uncovered the furniture, and slowly, painstakingly, began to clean away the years of neglect. Patrick, with his practical skills, fixed leaky faucets, repaired broken shutters, and got the old tractor in the barn sputtering back to life. Lila found a surprising satisfaction in simple physical labor, weeding the overgrown garden, pruning the apple trees, painting a faded windowsill. Music, too, began to return, not as a pressure or an obligation, but as a natural expression. She found an old acoustic guitar in a dusty case in the attic, her mother's guitar, she realized with a pang. The strings were rusty, the wood scarred, but when she cradled it in her arms, her fingers found the familiar chord shapes automatically. Tentative melodies emerged, fragments of songs, some her own forgotten compositions, others new tunes inspired by the rhythm of her new life, by the rustle of leaves in the willow tree, by Lily's laughter, by the quiet strength in Patrick's gaze. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Lila played one of those new melodies for Patrick and Lily. It was a simple song, filled with a quiet hope and a deep appreciation for second chances. When she finished, Lily clapped her small hands in delight, and Patrick looked at her, his eyes shining with an emotion that made Lila's heart ache in a sweet, unfamiliar way. "That was beautiful, Lila," he said softly. "It just came," she replied, a shy smile on her face. "It's been a long time since music felt like this. Like a friend." But the outside world could not be kept at bay forever. News of Lila True's reappearance, though initially confined to Arthur Jenkins and their small circle, inevitably began to leak out. A local reporter, chasing a rumor about the old Willow Creek farm being occupied, snooped around and caught a glimpse of Lila. The story, initially small, was picked up by entertainment blogs, then by national news outlets. Suddenly, Lila True was headline news again. The farm was besieged. Paparazzi camped outside the white gate, their long lenses invading the privacy Lila had fought so hard to reclaim. Helicopters buzzed overhead. The phone, once silent, rang incessantly with calls from agents, producers, talk show hosts, all wanting a piece of the Lila True comeback story. And then came the letter from Martin Thorne's lawyers. It was cold, formal, and threatening, demanding she cease and desist from any public statements or performances, reminding her of her contractual obligations, and hinting at severe legal and financial penalties if she failed to comply. Thorne, it was clear, was not going to let her go easily. He intended to either drag her back into the fold or silence her permanently. The assault was overwhelming. Lila felt the old panic rising, the suffocating sense of being trapped. She retreated into herself, the music drying up, the joy dimming. For a few dark days, she barely left the house, haunted by the feeling that Thorne had won, that her brief taste of freedom was over. Patrick watched her, his heart aching for her. He and Lily did their best to shield her, to create a small pocket of normalcy amidst the chaos, but the pressure was immense. He felt helpless, furious at Thorne, and the relentless machine that was trying to crush her spirit again. It was Arthur Jenkins who provided the spark of defiance. He arrived one blustery afternoon, pushing past the throng of reporters at the gate, his face set in a determined expression. He carried a briefcase full of documents. "They're trying to intimidate you, Lila," he said, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "Thorne is a bully, but bullies only win if you let them. We're going to fight back." Arthur had found something. Deep in the archives of an old music guild, he'd unearthed correspondence, minutes from meetings, that hinted at a pattern of unethical behavior by Thorne's record label, not just with Lila, but with other young artists. He'd also found a clause in Lila's original contract, a tiny, overlooked detail that might provide an opening, a stipulation about artistic integrity. and the right to refuse material deemed harmful to her career or well-being. Thorne, in his arrogance, had likely forgotten it, or assumed she'd never have the courage or the means to invoke it. "It's not a silver bullet," Arthur cautioned, "but it's a weapon." We can argue that Thorne's relentless pressure, his refusal to allow you creative freedom or adequate rest, constituted a breach of that clause. We can argue that he actively harmed your well-being, leading to your collapse and disappearance. He also had another idea. "Thorne wants to control the narrative," Arthur said. "So, let's give him a narrative he can't control. You're not just a commodity, Lila. You're an artist, a human being. It's time the world heard your side of the story, in your own words, in your own voice." He proposed a single, carefully chosen interview. Not with a sensationalist tabloid, but with a respected, serious journalist known for in-depth, compassionate storytelling. And more than that, he suggested she prepare a statement, perhaps even a new song, that expressed her truth. The thought terrified Lila, but it also ignited a flicker of her old fire. The locket around her neck felt warm against her skin. She thought of her mother, of her quiet strength. She looked at Patrick, his faith in her unwavering. She thought of Lily, and the simple, honest world she represented. "Okay," Lila said, her voice gaining strength. "Let's do it." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Lila worked with Arthur, meticulously documenting her experiences, her memories of Thorne's control and manipulation. And she poured out her heart, her pain, her anger, but also her hope, into the lyrics of a new song. It was raw, honest, and powerful, a ballad that told the story of a songbird who had lost her voice but was slowly, painstakingly, finding it again. She called it "My Own True North." Patrick was her rock through it all. He listened patiently as she struggled with painful memories, encouraged her when her confidence wavered, and celebrated every small victory. He also took on the role of de facto farm manager, organizing a small group of trusted locals to help with the apple harvest, ensuring that life on the farm, the life Lila cherished, continued despite the storm raging outside its gates. The community, initially curious, then sympathetic, rallied around her, forming a protective buffer against the worst of the media intrusion. The day of the interview arrived. A renowned journalist, a woman named Diane West, known for her integrity, came to the farm. The interview took place in the living room, by the stone fireplace, the dust sheets gone, the room filled with a quiet, lived-in warmth. Lila, dressed simply, her mother's guitar resting beside her, was nervous, but also strangely calm. Patrick sat just out of camera shot, a silent, supportive presence. Diane West was gentle but incisive with her questions. Lila, guided by Arthur, told her story. She spoke of her love for music, her mother's legacy, the early joy, and then the slow, creeping encroachment of Thorne's control. She didn't shy away from the pain, the exhaustion, the feeling of being a product. She spoke of her flight to the farm, her amnesia, the blank terror of it, and the kindness of strangers like Patrick and Lily, who had helped her find her way back, not just to her memory, but to herself. Then she picked up her guitar, her fingers, a little unsteady at first, then gaining confidence, found the chords. She looked directly into the camera, her eyes clear and unflinching, and she sang "My Own True North." Her voice, huskier now, richer with experience and pain, soared through the room, filled with a raw emotion that was utterly captivating. It was not the polished perfection of Lila True, the superstar. It was the heartfelt cry of Lila, the woman, the survivor. When she finished, there was a profound silence in the room. Diane West had tears in her eyes. Even the camera crew seemed moved. The interview aired a few days later. The impact was immediate and explosive. Lila's story, her vulnerability, her courage, and above all, her music, resonated deeply with the public. The narrative shifted. She was no longer just the vanished star. She was a symbol of resilience, an artist who had fought for her soul. Other artists, emboldened by her bravery, began to speak out about their own experiences with exploitative contracts and manipulative management. Martin Thorne and the record label tried to counter. They issued statements dismissing her claims, threatening lawsuits, attempting to paint her as delusional and ungrateful. But their accusations sounded hollow, desperate, in the face of Leela's undeniable authenticity. The tide of public opinion had turned decisively against them. Their carefully constructed image was crumbling. Legally, the battle was far from over. Thorne was too entrenched, too wealthy, to give up easily. But Arthur Jenkins was relentless, using the public support and the new evidence of industry-wide issues to put pressure on the label. He filed a lawsuit on Lila's behalf, seeking to invalidate her old contract based on fraud, duress, and the breach of artistic integrity. Weeks turned into months. The legal wrangling was slow, arduous, but Lila, freed from the immediate threat of being dragged back into Thorne's control, focused on her life at the farm. She continued to write music, songs that were honest and true to her experience. She worked alongside Patrick, their bond deepening into a quiet, unspoken love. Lily thrived in the nurturing environment, her laughter a constant reminder of the simple joys Lila was fighting to protect. The apple harvest was a success. Thanks to the community's help, Lila, inspired, decided to use some of the proceeds, along with what little remained of her mother's trust, to start a small foundation. Its purpose: to support young, independent artists, to provide them with fair legal advice and mentorship, to help them avoid the pitfalls she had endured. She called it the Songbird Trust. The farm itself began to transform. The neglected orchard was pruned and tended. The garden flourished. Lila, with Patrick's help, started a small community-supported agriculture (CSA) program, sharing the bounty of the land with her neighbors. The farmhouse, once a symbol of her isolation, became a warm, welcoming hub of activity, filled with music, laughter, and the scent of baking bread. One crisp autumn afternoon, a year after the storm that had brought her to Patrick's door, Arthur Jenkins arrived at the farm, a wide smile on his face. He carried a single document. "They settled," he announced, his voice filled with triumph. The label, Thorne. They saw the writing on the wall. The public backlash, the threat of more artists coming forward. They couldn't risk it. "They've agreed to release you from your old contract, to relinquish all claims on your past and future work. You're free, Lila, truly free." Lila stared at him, the words sinking in. Free. The cage door was finally, unequivocally, open. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of relief, of gratitude, of a joy so profound it left her breathless. Patrick was beside her in an instant, his arm around her shoulders, his own eyes shining. Lily, sensing the monumental nature of the moment, hugged Lila's legs tightly. There was no grand public announcement, no triumphant press conference. Lila simply continued to live her life, a life she had chosen, a life she had built from the ashes of her past. She recorded a new album, independently, in a small studio she set up in the barn. The songs were quiet, reflective, filled with the wisdom and resilience she had gained. It was released without fanfare, but it found its audience, touching hearts with its honesty and beauty. She never returned to the stadium tours, the red carpets, the glittering but hollow trappings of her former fame. Her stage now was the porch of the farmhouse, where she played for friends and neighbors, or the small community hall where the Songbird Trust hosted workshops for young musicians. Her greatest applause came from Lily's delighted giggles and the quiet pride in Patrick's eyes. One evening, as the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, Lila, Patrick, and Lily sat by the fireplace in the cozy living room of the Willow Creek farmhouse. A fire crackled merrily, casting a warm glow on their faces. Lila was softly strumming her mother's guitar, a gentle, contented melody filling the air. Patrick reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "Are you happy, Lila?" he asked, his voice low. She looked at him, her heart full. She thought of the journey, the darkness, the fear, the slow, painful climb back to the light. She thought of the love that surrounded her, the purpose she had found, the peace that had settled deep within her soul. "Yes," she whispered, her voice clear and true, like a perfectly struck note. "More than I ever thought possible. I found my way home, Patrick, not just to this farm, but to myself." And as the snow fell softly outside, blanketing the land in a quiet peace, Lila knew that her song, once lost, was now, finally, her own. The fog of the past had lifted, replaced by the clear, bright dawn of a future she embraced with an open heart, surrounded by the love of her found family, her true north guiding her every step. The music played on, a testament to resilience, to second chances, and to the enduring power of an authentic life, lived with courage and grace.